Call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's very hard to find much to agree with in the member for Melbourne's contribution, but I will agree with him that housing affordability is an issue, particularly in our major cities. And some recent numbers, Madam Deputy Speaker, a report from the end of year 2016. In New South Wales, in Sydney, we had a median house price of $880,000 Australian dollars. Now, Madam Speaker, in contrast, in Tasmania, the median house price is $320,000. So let's just assume that the member for Melbourne is correct and it is negative gearing the problem. Well, why isn't negative gearing a problem in Tasmania? Why is it a problem in one city and not a problem in another city? Why is negative gearing not a problem in our regional country areas where we see house prices that you can buy a 3 or a 4 bedroom house in many of the regional towns in New South Wales for $200,000 and $300,000 and $400,000? Why is negative gearing not a problem there, but it's a problem in Sydney? It's simple. Negative gearing is not the problem. The problem is a simple basis of supply and demand. And the member for Melbourne talked about back in 1994 that housing affordability wasn't a problem, and back in 1997 how it was so much less costful. If you look at the numbers, it's easy to see why. Because back in 1994 and 1997, we actually had a surplus of houses in this country. But since then, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had a deficit of the number of houses. We simply haven't had the number of houses being constructed that has kept up with the demand. And what has actually been driving the demand, Madam Deputy Speaker? Well, when the member for Melbourne talks about back in 1994-97, in those years, Madam Deputy Speaker, in fact, if we look from the 80s up to 2005, we had an average migration rate in this country of net migration of a little over 100,000 people. So if we're having 100,000 new migrants coming to this country, and I welcome every single one of them, we have to make sure that we have the housing supply that matches that net migration rate, the increase in housing supply. And that we were able to do throughout the 90s. But when we got, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we got to 2006, for some reason, and without going into the reasons, we decided in this country that we would increase our net migration intake. So we increased it from an average of a little over 100,000 to the last decade, we've had an average of around 250,000 people as a net migration increase. So if we're getting 250,000 net migration increase into the country, and we're not having that supply matching up, what does one think will happen? Especially when that migration increase is mainly in the cities of Sydney and Melbourne. It's like a game of reverse musical chairs, where you don't have enough chairs out to start with, you have people standing up, you bring more people to play into the game, and you only put a few more chairs out. That is what has been happening, and that is what has been forcing prices up year after year after year in our major capital cities. So the member for Melbourne is so wrong in his analysis. He's putting the cart before the horse. If we are going to address the issue of housing affordability in this country, we must address those issues of demand and supply. And if we're going to have migration rates, net migration rates of 250,000 people moving and settling into this country and our population increasing that above our natural increase, we have to make sure that we have the housing supply that not only catches up with the past deficit, but actually meets that. That's the only way, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are going to get housing affordability under control. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as far as the member for Melbourne's misguided attack on negative gearing, I'm not even sure he actually understands the principles of what it is. If you are investing in any income-producing asset, The cost of your interest is an expense that you leverage off against the income from that asset to work out what your taxable income is. This is not surprising. This is a fundamental, basic business principle of investing. Now, Madam Speaker, to suggest that we should wipe out negative gearing in this way, this will cause so many distortions throughout the economy. Because investors can invest in commercial property, they can invest in shares, they can invest in residential housing, they can invest in industrial property. There are so many areas that they can invest in, and the cost of the interest must be a deductible expense. This is not some tax rule, as the member for Melbourne talks about. So I would hope that the members of the opposition and also the Greens understand the fundamental drivers of what is causing our problem with housing affordability in this nation, and it has nothing to do with negative gearing. It is all about supply and demand factors. So we need to look at our migration rates. And whatever those migration rates are, we need to make sure that our housing supply stocks are increasing by the same proportional rate. And that's, Madam Deputy Speaker, already, that is on top of, according to the ANZ analysis, we still have a shortage of over 200,000 dwellings in this country. So we're 200,000 dwellings short that we need to catch up on. We're planning to have a net migration intake next year of 250,000 people. We must increase the supply. And that comes back to our state governments and our local councils as what they can do. But there are also some things that we can do federally. We need, Madam Deputy Speaker, to have another look at what we can do in this country as decentralisation. It is ridiculous that we are trying to, in a state of New South Wales of about 7.5 million people, if we were trying to cram 5 million people into Sydney. We need an active program to make it viable for young people to relocate to country areas. And one place that can start is with government. There is not a great deal of reason why many government departments should be located in the Sydney CBD. And we should go through every single government department and ask them what is the basis that they need to be in the Sydney CBD. And if there's no good reason for that, Madam Deputy Speaker, we should lead the way at federal government, and we should look at relocating those government departments out to our regional areas and out to our country areas. Now, I'm sure that if someone lived in Sydney, in the Sydney suburbs, they may have an hour's trip into the Sydney CBD and an hour's trip every day. They could spend over 2 hours commuting. But yet they could still have a house that's worth, an average house in many of our suburbs is worth $1.2 million. If those people were given the option to relocate somewhere, say, whether it be Nowra or Ulladulla or Bateman's Bay, where they could buy a house with a tennis court and a swimming pool, 5 minutes from their office, 5 minutes from the beaches, to be able to relocate and put $500,000 in their pocket, be better off, I think there would be a stampede. So that is one of the main things that we can do in the federal government. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would call on Labor and the Greens to get off this ridiculous hobby horse that they have of attacking the fundamental principle that an interest cost of an income-bearing investment is somehow a tax rule. It is not. All that will do, if that policy is enacted, we have seen it before. We have seen exactly what happened before. We know exactly what happened when Paul Keating thought it was a wonderful idea to get rid of negative gearing. It caused distortions, it caused a disaster, it caused rents to go through the roofs. And what happened? Paul Keating then realised he made a mistake and he reversed it. And yet we have people on the other side, ignorant of history, unable to understand the fundamental problems, that want to repeat that same mistake again without actually doing anything to tackle the fundamental problem. And what it does, Madam Deputy Speaker, by talking on and rabbling on about negative gearing, it takes us eye off the fundamental problem, and that is fixing the imbalances between supply and demand.
Order. The honourable member's time has expired.